Okay, we've given a couple more minutes for everybody to join. It looks like there's still others joining as well, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today as we cover the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. My name is Terry Ackerman. I lead the HR technology and human capital consulting team here at the Encompass Group. I'm here with Robert Rich, who will be handling most of the webinar today. And I'll give an introduction to him in a minute. I wanted to give you a brief overview of who Encompass is, and then we'll get right into the meat of today's presentation. The Encompass Group was formed almost 2 decades ago as a human capital management company. One of the areas that we help our clients in is talent management. So we help our clients attract, retain, train, develop their talent. We also provide technology solutions that automate the entire life cycle, employee life cycle, including payroll. In addition to the technology, we layer in a team of subject matter experts, certified subject matter experts in the areas of payroll, unemployment, performance management, employee engagement, the list goes on. A couple of those areas that we're going to focus on today is compliance and risk management. So you have joined a Ring Central webinar. Everybody has been muted. The only people that you'll be hearing from today are myself and Robert Rich. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen that will allow you to submit questions. Feel free to submit those questions throughout the presentation. We are going to be handling those at the end of the presentation. So submit your questions via Q&A, and we will get to as many of those as we can at the end. This webinar has been approved for one professional development credit towards SHRM recertifications. The SHRM activity ID number will be presented at the end of this presentation. We will also be distributing a copy of today's presentation to everyone who attended. Your presenter today is Robert Rich. He's a human capital consultant here with the Encompass Group. He's been with us for almost a year now. And he has over a decade of experience in human capital management. He holds multiple HR certifications and is passionate about helping leaders reach their business goals through effective coaching, management, and cultural strategies. I know he's excited to communicate a lot of this information. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Robert, and he's going to kick us off from here.
Hey guys, thank you, Terry. Hey, I really appreciate it. Guys, first and foremost, I just want to thank you for taking the time to tune into our webinar today. I know with everything going on with the kind of workplace changes recently, time is one of those commodities that is in short supply. So just really appreciate the fact that you're willing to take 30 or 45 minutes to hang out with us and really learn a little bit about this FFCRA Act. What we need to be doing, what we don't need to be doing, and how this is going to impact us on a day-to-day. I am coming to you today from my home office, which is very comfortable here in Dallas, Texas. So it's where we are based at Encompass. You'll see behind me, I am an avid baseball fan. So we get to know each other a little bit more personally than we might otherwise if we were in an office setting. So we're adhering to those social distancing guidelines. So anyway, I just kind of want to jump in to the presentation itself now. Of course, we're going to be talking about the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. The act itself is broken out into two kind of primary key provisions. Those provisions are the Emergency Family Medical Leave Expansion Act, which is an expansion of the existing FMLA, and the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act. So two different provisions that are under the Families First umbrella that do two different things. I want to talk about maximum entitlements, so the maximum amount of time that employees are able to take under these acts, as well as the maximum dollar amounts that you as an employer are kind of subject to providing as a part of that leave. There are some potential exemptions in this act. So from an employer standpoint, based on your size. So we're going to talk about those and clear some of that up. As far as postal requirements, we do have some new requirements that come as a part of this act. So we'll talk about what those requirements are, where you can get them, where you need to post them, et cetera. There are some new tax credits as a part of this act. So reimbursable to the employer. So we'll talk through that and how you can take advantage of that. We need to touch on the importance of time tracking and why that right now is kind of more important than ever in a lot of ways. And then we'll end with some general considerations around furloughing, laying off, unemployment, and some things to think about there. So quick overview of the FFCRA. This was signed into law back on the 18th of March, and we anticipate this to remain in place from April 1st, so tomorrow, to December 31st of this year. So tomorrow, we call that our takeoff date. So tomorrow through the end of the year. I did want to add this date, April 17th, in here, just kind of as for your knowledge. So as you're Googling, as you're kind of researching this act and reading about it, you might see this April 17th date pop up as the kind of temporary non-enforcement period of this act. That does not mean that you don't really have to comply with this act until April 17th. All that means is you aren't necessarily going to be penalized for that act until April 17th. You still got to show that, hey, once we found out about this act, we took all necessary actions to remedy any violations. So it's not kind of a get out of jail free card. So for all of us, we're all aware that the act is going into place tomorrow. We should all be in compliance tomorrow. And then generally speaking, because there are some exemptions, but generally speaking, this act applies to employers in the small to medium kind of size. This does not apply to your extremely large employees. So 500 is kind of our cutoff number. If you've got 500 employees or fewer, this act will apply to you. If you've got over that threshold, so your Walmarts, Microsofts, Amazons, this act will have no impact on the extremely large employers. So that's kind of an overview of some of the act itself. Let's break down the two provisions, and we'll start with the family medical leave expansion. So this is the E FMLA. So as we stated, this is a temporary expansion of the existing FMLA. This is only going to last, as far as we understand now, until the end of the year, this year. Then it will go back to kind of regular FMLA. Different than FMLA, the expansion of the FMLA is both paid and unpaid leave. I know all of our HR people on this call are aware that FMLA is entirely unpaid job protected leave, but the expanded act is paid after a waiting period. The time an employee must serve is also different compared to the FMLA. So where to be eligible for FMLA, an employee has to serve for at least 12 months. To be eligible for this FMLA expansion, an employee must only serve 30 days with an employer. So, very different in terms of kind of service time. So you could, if you were eligible for expanded FMLA, you could take 6 weeks of that, come back to your employer, but still not yet have the eligibility for regular FMLA if you did not meet that service requirement. So the way these kind of play with each other is very interesting. Similarly to the FMLA, you must provide 12 weeks of job protected leave with the expanded FMLA. And I want to talk about that for a moment too. So this 12 weeks that the FMLA expansion is offering is not a different 12 weeks than your standard FMLA offers. It is one bucket. It's not 12 plus 12 equals 24. It is an overall 12-week bucket of FMLA time and expanded FMLA time that employees are eligible to use. That being said, if an employee has already exhausted their 12 weeks of FMLA for your employer under however if you're using the rolling year method, they may not be eligible for expanded FMLA now if that time is exhausted. So just wanted to point that out. This is not an addition to regular FMLA weeks. This is the same bucket. The expansion of FMLA, you'll notice there's really one thing that it covers. It's for employees who cannot work and can't telework, and they need to provide care to a child because that child's school is closed, daycare is closed, caregiver is unavailable, and it's got to be due to the COVID-19 public health emergency. So this is very specific, and it's meant for people who have to care for a child and cannot otherwise do so due to COVID-19. So we said that the expansion of FMLA is both paid and unpaid. So the expansion is partially paid after day 10. There's a 10-day waiting period before that payment kicks in under the expanded FMLA. So during that 10 days, an employee can substitute their time off if they have paid time off through vacation time, sick time bucket, et cetera. They can use that to supplement their time for that first 10 days, or they can use their time under the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act, which we'll talk about in a moment. Interestingly, though, you cannot require an employee to substitute their paid sick time under the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act, and you cannot require them to use their vacation time. If you and the employee agree that they can supplement that time with either paid sick time under the Act or PTO vacation sick time, they're able to do so. And then after that 10-day waiting period is satisfied, the leave is paid at 2/3 the employee's regular rate of pay. The cap on this that's eligible for tax reimbursement is $200 per day or $10,000 total per employee. So if you've got an employee, let's say, that makes $100 an hour, they're not going to get their full days, at 2/3 rate of pay. That would be $400 or $530 and change or something. They would only get that cap of $200 per day. Now, inversely, if you have an employee who makes $9 an hour and they don't quite hit that $200 per day cap, they're only going to get their regular rate of pay, or $200 a day, whichever is higher, right? So if I usually make $150 a day, I'm going to get that $150. I'm not going to be trued up to that $200 limit. And the limit for this act in terms of tax reimbursements is $10,000 per employee in total. So this is a question that we've seen quite a bit recently here at the Encompass Group. How do we know if the need for childcare is legitimate? We've had quite a few clients reach out with this question. And the DOL, you may be aware, the Department of Labor has not yet issued its regulations on this act. So there is a lot that we still don't know here, but we have some kind of initial guidance. And the initial guidance is that we can request documentation to support leave kind of similarly to the extent permitted under regular FMLA. So for the need for childcare under the expansion of FMLA, we can say, hey, we want to see a post from your school, right? Like have they closed and they posted that online? Does your daycare have a closure that's posted online? Anything in a newspaper, email from an employee of the school, or even an email from the child's care provider. But that would need to explicitly state, the care is not available due to COVID-19. So those are the things that we can request to sort of verify that this need for childcare is legitimate. But as we stated, additional guidance and documentation is coming from the DOL as soon as they get around to really issuing these regulations. Right now, what we've got to go on, the DOL has a website, dol.gov, and they have created like a Q&A, like an FAQ site. The site is updated regularly, but they don't always tell us when it's updated. We've just got to keep kind of checking back to get answers to these questions that are very frequently asked. I do know at Encompass, when those regulations come out, all of our clients are going to be aware of kind of what kind of impact that has on them and their businesses. So we've got a kind of a general understanding now of the Expansion FMLA Act, and that was Provision 1. Provision 2 here is the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act expansion, which is a different kind of subset of this FFCRA. This one is super interesting. So this one is federal sick leave. This is an entirely new concept for us kind of in the HR world, right? So we know that some cities have mandated sick leave. We know that some states have mandated sick leave. But up until now, there was no nationwide mandate that any employer had to offer sick leave. That all changes effective tomorrow. So we've got to kind of wrap our heads around this, get used to that, and get used to it quickly. So this Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act, similar to the expansion of FMLA, is only going to be in effect from tomorrow until the end of the year. So this one, as things sit now, is going to fall off December 31st, 2020, and hopefully we'll be back to kind of operation as usual. The Expanded Paid Sick Leave Act provides 80 hours of paid time off for use by any employee regardless of their tenure. So it is for immediate use. For example, if I elected to start a new job tomorrow and I got sick on Thursday, I would have 80 hours of paid time to use under EPSLA, assuming my illness was caused by COVID or a related reason. An employee is able to use this EPSLA sick time before using any other kind of accrued PTO. So as employers, we can't say, well, hey, you have this vacation bucket, you have this sick time bucket. We want you to exhaust that, right, to get that off of our books before we're going to let you take this EPSLA. That's a no-no. We've got to allow them to use this before any other PTO. We cannot require them to exhaust their buckets first. And we'll remember that maximum entitlements under the expanded FMLA were $200 per day or $10,000 in the aggregate. There are also maximum entitlements under the EPSLA, but those are dependent on the reason that the leave is needed. So these acts are both pretty complex. So we'll try to break down those reasons and bucket them out for you here in a moment. So, but before we do that, let's talk about kind of when this kicks in. Under what circumstances might an employee be able to take expanded paid sick leave? So there are a few kind of buckets that they would need to fall in to be eligible for this leave. The first is they are subject to an isolation order or a quarantine order, and that can be federal, local, or state. The second is if their doctor or healthcare provider, whether that is a registered nurse, their doctor, has advised them to stay home or self-quarantine due to concerns related to COVID-19. Notice this does not say that they have been diagnosed with COVID-19. It just says due to concerns relating to COVID-19. So if a healthcare provider has advised me to stay home for 14 days because my wife is infected, I would be able to use this paid sick leave for that. If I'm experiencing symptoms of COVID and I'm seeking a medical diagnosis, I would be eligible for this time. If I'm caring for anyone who we just kind of discussed there, who's described in any of those previous bullets, or if I'm caring for a minor child whose school, place of work, place of care is closed due to COVID, I can take this time. Or if I'm experiencing any other substantially similar condition related to COVID-19. So if my lungs are locked up and I think I have COVID and I'm going to the doctor seeking a diagnosis for that, even if it's not COVID, but it's a substantially similar condition, maybe I just have the flu, right? But I believe I have COVID, I'm experiencing those symptoms, I'm seeking a medical diagnosis. We should be allowing employees to use this time for that. So now let's talk about the maximum entitlements under this expanded paid sick leave act. So there are two buckets here. There's the, hey, I'm taking time for myself bucket, and then there's the I'm taking time to care for someone else bucket. We'll talk about the self bucket first. So if an employee themselves is subject to an isolation order, a local quarantine, a state quarantine, et cetera, if an employee themselves has been advised by their healthcare provider to self-quarantine due to concerns related to COVID, or if the employee themselves is experiencing those symptoms, this is going to be the higher threshold. In these circumstances, these employees can be receive up to $511 per day, or $5,110 over the entire paid sick leave period. Remember, that entire paid sick leave period is 80 hours, or 2 weeks worked, essentially. So those are the maximums there. And again, similar to FMLA, if I make, we'll say $1,000 per day, under this expanded paid sick leave act, I'm only entitled to $511 of that. Now, if an employer wanted to agree to allow an employee to true up that missing $500, if they're making, we'll say, $1,000 a day, employers can allow employees to do that. But we've got to consider that anything over this $511 per day is not eligible for tax credit reimbursements. And it is not a requirement that employers allow that. So employers can say, hey, you know, if you're going to take your paid sick leave under the expanded paid sick leave act, we don't allow true ups. Really, you take that maximum pay per day. So that is an employer decision. Second bucket is the care for others bucket. So if an employee is taking sick leave because they're caring for an individual who is subject to one of those quarantine orders. And for me, the first time I read this was, well, heck, if I'm caring for an individual who's subject to a quarantine order, a state quarantine order, wouldn't I be subject to that same order myself and eligible for the higher dollar amount? Not necessarily true, because you'll notice here, it says nothing about a child. It just says caring for an individual who has been advised to stay home. So if I've got grandma who lives 3 cities over, she's subject to a local quarantine, but I'm not, and I need to be there to care for her because of that COVID-related reason, I'm going to be subject to this bucket, not the care for self bucket. If they're caring for a child whose place of work is closed, place of care is closed, or the child care provider is unavailable, these are the scenarios in which an employee could be entitled to that maximum of $200 per day, or $2,000 over the entire 2-week period. So remember, that 2-week period is those 80 hours over essentially 10 days. Only $200 per day. And it's similar to what we discussed about the $500 amount. If an employee makes more than that per day, they can elect to true up if we as an employer agree, but we do not have to allow that. So exemptions from the FFCRA. Again, DOL regulations are not out on this yet, but we do have some guidance that is being updated almost daily that we can kind of get a pretty fair idea on what this is going to look like. So the latest and greatest is that small businesses with fewer than 50 employees may qualify for exemption from certain requirements of the Act. So that certain requirements is in the verbiage and the guidance that we've been reading so far. I haven't seen anything where it says may be exempt from the Act entirely. Really, the main area that has been referenced under that certain requirements are those childcare pieces of the Act. So more to come as these DOL regulations are released. And when they are, all of our Encompass clients will be notified of kind of what these are looking like. But if you may qualify for an exemption, right, it's got to be because compliance with the Act is going to jeopardize the validity of the business. So it would be situations like severe cash flow issues on the front end. You know, we cannot afford to pay out time off. We've got too many employees requesting the time off, and it will take us as a business. Things like that are things that may qualify for these potential exemptions. So the guidance we've received to this point is if this does sound like it might be you or might end up being you, begin documenting why your business meets the criteria that's set forth by the Department of Labor. Take a look at the Department of Labor FAQ website, and there are some criteria that an officer of the company will need to determine whether or not they feel like this is satisfied currently to qualify for an exemption. So that should give you at least a decent idea on the front end to determine, hey, does this sound like something that might be possible for us? Again, waiting for those regulations, and when they come out, all of our Encompass clients will be made aware. There are also new poster requirements. So this one's fun. The DOL released a poster, rescinded the poster, and then released another poster that is updated. So this is the updated poster. So employers have got to post this with their other kind of employment law, wage and hour posters, right? So if you're still going to the office and you've still got people going in the office, this should go up in your break room, common meeting area, wherever your wage and hour, FMLA, your typical notice posters are right now. This requirement, though, can also be satisfied by either emailing this to all your employees, mailing it to their homes, or the DOL has even said if you post this to your intranet or an external website, that would kind of satisfy this requirement. One thing to be aware of, though, if you're going to be emailing this poster out, DOL has said that we as employers need to be amending our policies, right? We need to be amending our sick time and our FMLA policies to reflect these new requirements under the Act if we are under that 500 employee threshold. So just to kind of keep yourself safe, what we would advise to do is add some verbiage in your email blast to this poster, letting employees know that this supplements any existing policies that you have for FMLA or sick time. So they're aware on the front end, like, hey, this is going to slide right in there. Really important to get this out and to get this out, if you haven't already, by tomorrow. We need to get this out by April 1 to be in compliance with these guidelines. The poster itself and those other resources I've been referring to, a DOL FAQ, OSHA's got some great FAQ. You can get to all of those from the link I've got posted on my screen. So you can just start at the dol.gov, click the COVID button, and it'll get you right to all this great information. Here's another one that's gone back and forth a little bit recently, the tax credits for employers and how this is going to work. So you may be aware that initially this was all going to be handled on the back end. An employer would have to file all their quarterly taxes and then kind of wait for the reimbursement. But that guidance has since changed. So kind of starting from the top here, the tax credit provisions are going to be equal to 100% of the qualifying wages that you pay under these two programs. Of course, those are going to be subject to those caps that we've discussed, but any dollar you pay, dollar for that sick time or expanded FMLA time, you will be able to get back. One of the questions that we've received is, hey, is it just the taxes that we're paying on that, or is it dollar for dollar? Like, what does it kind of look like? Are there going to be taxes on it? It is dollar for dollar, the amount paid you can get back in the form of these payroll tax credits. This tax credit will not be retroactive. So if you're one of those employers who say, we're going to do right by our employees, we are going to start an expanded sick time early. We're going to go ahead and you might have started this 2 weeks ago. Any time that you pay to employees prior to tomorrow, and even if you're saying, hey, it was under this act or under the guise that we knew that this act was coming up, and unfortunately, you're not going to be able for tax credit. It's only eligible for April 1 and out. So we talked about kind of the differing guidance. Now what we're hearing is employers, instead of having to kind of remit those payroll taxes, they're going to be able to retain the payroll taxes that they would have remitted, rather than depositing them up front and waiting for kind of a cash back on that. If your payroll tax deposit is less than your FFCRA tax credit would have been, you are eligible to file a request for a check from Uncle Sam for the overage amount. And there is going to be, the IRS has said they're going to make an accelerated process for this available. But similarly to the DOL, we don't have a whole lot of detail from the IRS yet on how that's going to work. They have stated that they're going to provide some detailed guidance on the administration of the credits and the payments. We don't have it yet. We just have the overview. All Encompass clients are going to get this kind of the latest and greatest hot off the press as soon as it comes out. We're going to be sending some communications on that to our clients. This is one I want to spend a second on because I think it's very important in terms of your tax credits. So you need to be checking with your payroll provider or your HRAs payroll provider to make sure that they have updated their systems with new codes, new time tracking codes that are going to be available tomorrow, that are going to be able to reflect these new leave types. At Encompass, our partner is all over this. We are ready to go, but this is super, super important. If you haven't heard anything yet from your HRAS payroll provider about this, you need to be reaching out to them and making sure that they are ready for kickoff tomorrow. This is important for a multitude of reasons, but first is that you're in compliance with the Act, right? We want to be sure that we're doing what we need to be doing. Second and third are the financial reasons, which are huge. You need to be, any tax credit dollars that you're paying out, you're entitled to get back. So we want to be sure that we are tracking this time appropriately, tracking the leave appropriately, so those dollars that are going out the front end can come back to us. And third, we want to be sure that in the event that you have an IRS audit, you're prepared for it. You've got all your records. We discussed the guidance changing to, hey, we can kind of keep what we would have owed instead of having to pay it out and get it back on the back end. Well, with that comes the potential for an IRS audit. Are you doing what you say what you need to be doing? Are you really keeping the money that is yours to keep, or are you kind of skimming some off the top? You need to be sure that your HRS payroll provider is prepared to handle these kind of things. As I said, at Encompass, we're ready, but if you have someone that you're using and you haven't heard, you need to reach out. Furloughing employees and unemployment. So this is one that, it's tough and nobody really likes to talk about, but it's a situation that a lot of us have recently found ourselves in. So I want to kind of talk about doing right by your people, right, and making sure that we're doing everything that we can to get them set up for any benefits that they may be eligible to receive. So if you're furloughing employees, right, and by furlough, I mean either cut their schedules for a couple weeks, or maybe they're working 3 hours a week now instead of 40 hours a week. Even if they're still employed by your company, but they're working 3 hours rather than 40 hours a week, they may still be eligible for unemployment benefits. These benefits are determined on a state-by-state basis. But there's a very high chance, especially with all kind of the new guidance coming out now, that states are making it easier for employees to obtain these benefits. They may still be eligible. So it's really important, if you have an unemployment claims administrator, that they know that the changes that you're making are related to COVID, that you're not going to be contesting any of these claims, that you're identifying these employees so we can get these through as quickly as possible. Our partners at Encompass here are great. Our clients are aware of this, and they know kind of how this is going to work. They don't need to kind of shoulder that unemployment burden for themselves. But if you are doing that yourself, make sure you're working with these employees to let them know, hey, I hear you. I understand the reason for the decision. I'm going to try to get this in as quick as I can. But I also understand that you guys have got other jobs too. So ideal situation, you've got an unemployment claims administrator, and they're aware of how to handle these furloughs as they relate to COVID, so we can get these people set up for benefits as quickly as we can. And the bigger decision, I wanted to talk about this for a second. So before we're making any of these layoff and furlough decisions, if we can wait and hold out for a minute now, if we've got a couple of days, there's all kinds of information and assistance that is currently being talked about. So one of them, is the CARES Act. This was just signed by the president on last Friday afternoon. So decisions that you make regarding your furloughs, your layoffs, or your RIFs, they can impact whether you're going to qualify for a business relief loan and the amount of debt that you may be forgiven for. So there's a lot to consider. Maybe, hey, if this is going to impact how much debt I can get forgiven for, maybe I can push off a layoff. So there's a lot of potential assistance that may be or that will be coming. And at Encompass, we're going to be hosting a webinar next week on the CARES Act and what that means for your business. So if that's something that you're interested in, please be sure to join us for that. But kind of more importantly, I mean, for me, and of course, like I said, Encompass is a Dallas company. I myself am a big Mark Cuban fan. I was reading some a quote of his that he's stated recently, and I think this was really powerful to me. So, I mean, how you're treating people now, based on kind of how you're communicating changes to them if you have to make changes, holding their hand through some of these difficult times. I mean, this is really tough stuff, and how we handle this is going to have a really lasting impact on our brands. And our brand is our company. The business that we do is wholly dependent on the kind of brand and the reputation that we had. So I saw this quote from Mark Cuban, and this was specifically around, hey, I've got my employees out, but I need to get them back because I want to start my business and get some cash flow coming back in. But he said, how companies respond to that very question is going to define their brand for decades. If you rushed in and got somebody sick, then you were that company. And if you didn't take care of your employees or your stakeholders, you put them first, then you were that company. And nobody wants to be that company. So I just wanted to encourage everybody, and I know that everybody is doing their best right now, but to really take some of this stuff to heart when we're thinking about the decisions we're making, and take advantage of any resources that are potentially available to you as a result of some of these new acts. And this is my kind of conclusion of the presentation itself. I know we're going to be doing a Q&A session here in a moment, but remember to take it one day at a time. There isn't anyone on the planet right now, I think, that can answer all of the questions that us HR professionals are going to have in regards to the FFCRA. And candidly, I don't know that the people that are creating the answers to all of these questions know what the answers are yet. This is all brand new stuff. The act was passed incredibly quickly. IRS is still trying to catch up with what the DOL is trying to do. So just take it one day at a time. I know we've all got to kind of take a deep breath right now, but we're going to get through it. I wanted to remind you, if you haven't checked already, the Department of Labor COVID-19 FAQ page is fantastic. It's updated on a regular basis. They are not telling us when it's updated. There's never a ribbon on the site that says, new guidance posted. You just got to keep checking back and seeing if there is new guidance. So check back often and kind of keep yourself posted there. Additionally, OSHA has done a lot of workplace safety guidelines that they've posted as well. So that's a resource to you. And the CARES Act, that's something that we're going to be doing a webinar soon. So if you're interested in that, what we spoke about for a moment, feel free to tune in, and we're happy to help you understand that in a little more detail. So that concludes kind of my presentation. I'm going to hand it back over to Terry for some kind of closing comments, and then we're going to kick off a Q&A.
Great. Thank you so much, Robert. That information was very insightful. I wanted everybody to know, I've already seen some questions come through about today's presentation. We will be distributing the PowerPoint slides to everybody that attended today. So be on the lookout for that. We will also be sending follow-up information around FFCRA. We will be hosting multiple webinars a week moving forward. As Robert mentioned, one of those will be around the CARES Act. So, and how it's going to impact your business. There's a lot of moving parts there. So we're excited. Everybody that joined today will be on that invite list. So be on the lookout for that. If you're interested in learning more about the Encompass Group and how we can help your business, please call us at 469-293-3060, or you can email us at info@theencompassgroup.com. Robert, if you'll move to the next slide. There you go. So for everybody that has it, there's a lot of information on this slide, but if you like to seek additional information from the Encompass Group, we have our website, our email, our main phone number there. We are also offering everyone that attended today's webinar a free HR assessment that we will provide information on as a follow-up to today. So that will be information that we'll be sending out to you, along with kind of some additional contact information from the Encompass Group. And I also wanted to note that in the bottom right of the PowerPoint slide that you see is your SHRM activity ID number. If you want to go ahead and take a moment to jot that down, that will give you 1 professional development credit through SHRM. So we're happy to offer that to you. So at this point, we are going to move into our Q&A session. and we have a lot of questions. I don't know if we'll get through them all in the next 15 minutes, but we're going to do our best. Okay, so I'm going to start with the questions that came in first, and then we'll kind of go through the list. A lot of these are very similar, so I'll try to group those questions together. The first question: can an employer deny a request due to the needs of the business? For example, a department has 7 employees and 5 of them are requesting paid leave to care for their children who are home due to school closures. Can the employer deny a leave request?
So on this one, it would depend on the size of the employer, because this would be one of those potential exemptions from certain requirements that we were talking about. One of those certain requirements was the staying at home to care for a child whose school was closed. So if the company is 50 or fewer employees, you do have a potential for an exemption here if it's going to substantially limit your business. If you are larger than 50 employees, you will not be able to claim an exemption based on business needs.
Thanks, Robert. Next question. If a job is shut down because of COVID and there's no other job to send the employee to, are they eligible for FFCRA or unemployment?
It's a really good question. So, and this is one that I didn't touch on. If there is no work available for the employee due to COVID, so if a position's been eliminated, if they're furloughed, if the job is just gone, FFCRA no longer applies. And it's the same if you've got someone who, we'll say someone was out on FFCRA leave. And then, halfway through the leave, the business couldn't sustain that position anymore. So they had to eliminate that role and other roles. Of course, you can't do this based on the leave, but we'll say from a business standpoint, you had to eliminate all of those positions entirely. The FFCRA leave would stop. It is only for roles that are currently kind of active and going. So if the job is shut down because of COVID and there's nowhere to send the employee to, they may be eligible for unemployment, but they would not be eligible for any of this leave under FFCRA.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Next question. If our company follows the CDC guidelines and requires that an employee self-quarantine for 14 days before going to a project after traveling to the US from Mexico, is the employee eligible for CARES Act unemployment?
So the CARES Act is something, this was signed into law last Friday. So we have not yet gotten a chance to wrap our heads around this in its entirety. We've not gotten a chance to consult with our legal partners on this yet. But this is our task for this coming week. We're certainly going to be able to provide an answer to that question on our CARES webinar, which is coming.
Okay, so more to come on that, everybody. A traveling employee that is working in Texas and lives in Atlanta is nervous about COVID, his family, and getting stuck in Texas because of border closures. He has requested to go home. Is there any paid assistance available for this employee?
So this was an interesting question that kind of came up yesterday. As long as you are providing a safe work environment, there is nothing that says an employee can not go to work just because they are, in essence, kind of concerned or scared of going to work, at least right now. Now, there are some other kind of things to be considerate of from a National Labor Relations standpoint. If you have a bunch of employees taking a concerted effort to improve the conditions of the workplace, that kind of stuff. But this question in itself, there's no paid assistance available that I could think of just because this employer is saying, hey, COVID's a concern of mine. I'm not exhibiting symptoms. I don't know that I've been exposed, but I'm just concerned. There's no paid assistance that I'm aware of for that.
Okay. It looks like we have 27 more questions. So my guess is that we're not going to get to all these. So again, I'll try to consolidate as much as I can here. What documentation can we require to substantiate FFCRA qualifying reasons? Specifically, can we request written documentation that an employee has been advised to quarantine? Can we ask for validation that they are waiting for a diagnosis? How do we substantiate that they have someone at home to care for? et cetera. There's some other questions, but
Sure. So
just
this one,
at a high level, do we have an answer for that?
yeah, we do. On this one, the guidance, the super detailed guidance for, of course, in the form of these regulations have not been released yet, but we have some high level guidance on what we can and ask for. Really anything that we would be able to ask for that we would also be able to ask for as part of the normal FMLA process, we can ask for here. So that would include documentation from a physician that would advise that this person has been, asked to quarantine. We can ask, the second question is, can we ask for validation that the person is waiting for a diagnosis? To me, this is a little bit of a tougher one. If you've got somebody with COVID symptoms, really, if someone calls me and I'm the supervisor and someone says, hey, my lungs are locked up, I can't come to work right now, I'm trying to get in the doctor, but I can't get in just yet. I'm not going to say get to the office, right? I'm going to say, okay, well, you've got this time that you're potentially eligible for. You're seeking a diagnosis. Let us know, when you're ready, when you've been diagnosed, when you've gone to that doctor's appointment. In the event of an FMLA, and I'm just going to kind of make this similar to FMLA because that's the current understanding that we have, we could ask for that doctor's note after they go to the appointment. Similarly, we can ask for the doctor's note after they go to this appointment. But on the front end, I think it's the best practice to err on the side of caution and go ahead and give them that paid leave. Substantiating they have someone at home to care for, or that the school or place of care is closed for the child, you can certainly do that. You can ask for evidence of the closure, whether it's a website. They've even said, if you can't get evidence of a closure on a website or something that's publicly available, you can ask for an email from the caregiver themselves. So substantiate you have someone at home to care for. I don't see any reason you couldn't ask for an email from the person that they're caring for. So there are some things that we can do. Keep in mind, we don't have those regulations yet, but start to think about this in the same way that you would think about, hey, what could I ask for if this was an FMLA request? Really similar to what you could ask for an expanded FMLA request.
Okay. And I think this might be kind of a follow-up to that. It was from somebody else, but it's kind of related. Can an employee use the expanded FMLA leave to provide relief to another caregiver? A non-working spouse has been home with the children for weeks. Can the working spouse request the FMLA plus leave to be home and taking over caring for the children?
So, on this one, I think if the think about this in terms of FMLA for parents, right? If my wife stays at home and we have a child, I'm still entitled to FMLA leave for bonding time or care for a child. It's very likely going to be the exact same way here. So even if we've got a caregiver at home and I feel the need to take care of the child, and these are people that I need to care for, should be eligible for the expanded FMLA as well.
Okay. Are you subject to the act if the number of employees fluctuates above and below 500? I believe the answer to this is it depends at the time of the leave request. So if you are a company that fluctuates, say you're between 495 and 505, based on that day when someone requests the leave, that's what will dictate if you're above or below 500 and if you're subject to the regulation. Is that correct, Robert, in my understanding?
Yeah, Terry, I know that was correct at one point, but I don't know if there's been some additional guidance released on that. I feel like there may have been for those employees that fluctuate back and forth. Let's go with that answer for now, but I would really encourage this question asker to do a little bit of research on the DOL website, or of course, if this was an Encompass client, we could follow up. But this is what I'm not 100% confident on. So let's take a pass on this one and have them do a little research on the DOL for this.
Okay. All right. Some of the questions I'm seeing are around what makes up the 500 employee threshold. Is it full-time and part-time employees combined? I'm getting a lot of questions around that.
Yeah, if we're getting a lot of questions around that, let's just kind of dive into that in detail. So I'm actually looking, since everybody's kind of asking about this this 500. I'm looking at some info now, so we can really kind of get it word from the horse's mouth. This is directly from the Department of Labor. You have fewer than 500 employees if at the time of your leave is to be taken, you employ fewer than 500 full-time and part-time employees in the U.S. That includes U.S., District of Columbia, territories, etc. So similar to FMLA, it's only those U.S. Employees that are going up into this 500 number. In making the determination, you need to include employees who are on leave, temporary employees who are jointly employed by you and an employer, all day laborers supplied by a temporary agency, and workers who are independent contractors under the FLSA. So the way that this reads is that part-time employees as well as full-time employees are considered as employees for the 500 employee threshold, regardless of their status as part-time or full-time.
Right. And it's kind of a follow-up to that. One of the questions was around like FTE, full-time equivalent.
Yep.
So, two people working 20 hours a week, that's one FTE, but in this case, that would be 2 employees that would count towards that 500 threshold, correct?
Yep. And it looks like we've got a question very similar, so I think we just covered that one.
Okay. And then if someone is out and using EPSL, but we are planning layoffs, is that employee protected from a layoff? Or if we can prove that we were taking action before the request, can we proceed?
Yep, this is one that's very clearly addressed in the guidance that we have from DOL at this point. If the position was going to be eliminated anyway, and you were going to be taking that action anyway, and this is not a retaliatory measure for this person for taking their paid sick leave time, you can certainly proceed with eliminating those positions.
Okay. Thank you. For employees ordered by a federal, state, or local quarantine, would essential employees for cities, for example, waterworks or wastewater operators, are they exempt from this qualifying reason?
That's a really great question. So right now, the only guidance that's available for kind of exemptions are in the healthcare field. So first responders and healthcare providers. So we're thinking like your police officers, your ambulance drivers, and anyone who's in the healthcare field, so nurses, et cetera. There's no delineation right now in any of the guidance that kind of says, hey, essential employers versus non-essential employers. Waterworks or wastewater operators, I don't think would fall under either a first responder or a healthcare operator, but that's a great question. And I can see kind of where this person is coming from. Just because that has not been clarified yet doesn't mean it's not going to be clarified. So at this point, I don't think we have an answer to that. I don't think there's one out there. So let's continue to look at those DOL regulations and see if that's addressed explicitly.
Okay. We have about 5 minutes. Robert, you can see some of the questions are there. We keep getting an influx of questions. Looks like we have about 20 more. Are there any of these that kind of stick out to you that might be kind of the most?
Yeah, let me just kind of pick and choose some good ones here. So here's one about, does the EPSLA run concurrently with the E FMLA? So here's an example. Employee is on paid sick leave and then their health doesn't improve and they go on FMLA. Would the first 1 to 2 weeks of paid sick leave count towards the 10-day period of FMLA, and their expanded FMLA starts immediately? So great question. And we've got to remember here, because an expansion of the FMLA, remember that did not explicitly, it's not for an employee health reason. It's not like the FMLA as we think about it, right? The FMLA as we think about it now is, you've got a health reason, you've got someone else with a chronic health condition that you've got to care for. Those are the reasons that FMLA would qualify. The expanded FMLA is only that care for a child provision. So while you can take the EPL, say, for the 1 to 2 weeks and their condition doesn't improve, they may then be eligible for regular FMLA, right? Because then it becomes a chronic health condition and they've got time under regular FMLA, but that wouldn't go into expanded FMLA. So you would be able to do that kind of first 2 weeks paid, that 80 hours for that health condition. But then if the employee had met 12 month of service time under regular FMLA and you were an employer that that needed to offer regular FMLA. That is kind of the route that employee would go, not the expansion FMLA route, if that makes sense. I don't know. I know I said E FMLA and FMLA a lot. I hope that was clear.
It's not confusing at all.
Yeah.
You did a great job. I know it's a lot of different information and different components of these different leave types.
Yeah.
I have one for you. When we talked about the maximum amount per day for emergency sick leave under the Act of $511, we had mentioned that companies could allow true-ups. What are true-ups under this context?
Yeah, so how I was referring to that is, we'll say an employee is at that $511, and just for the sake of ease of math, I guess, we'll say they make $600 a day. Right, so that is a difference of $89 per day that they're not getting that they're typically getting. So an employer can say, hey, you can take your $511 here under the Act, and we will let you take $89 worth of sick time or vacation time or whatever other kind of time bucket that you have. Now, there's probably going to be a pretty complex and confusing math problem that comes along with this, because you're going to have to figure out what amount of time would equate to that dollar amount to true them up to their normal $600 per day amount. But it is something as an employer that you can allow. Now, that being said, it's not something that you are required to allow. And my anticipation is that most employers will not allow this, just because that math problem seems like a bear to calculate, especially on a large scale.
Okay. And I think we got this question yesterday, but are people required to post the information, the poster slide that we had? If you're over 500 employees, not only are these do these acts not apply to you, but you're also not required to communicate that poster in any form to your employees.
Correct. Yeah. So if you are one of those larger organizations, you're not close to that 500 number. Say you've got 600, 650, 700. Nothing in this act impacts you at all. It is business as usual. You can still go with your regular FMLA, your regular sick time that you offer. You don't have to be concerned about this act. Now, that being said, if you're one of these companies that is like, sometimes we have 510, sometimes we have 490, I would encourage you to go ahead and post this in your break room, send it to all your employees. In the event that they need some of this leave, because you may well be under that mark or when someone requests leave. I see another question here, and I know we're getting short on time, but I want to be sure to answer this one. Can expanded paid leave, emergency paid leave and expanded FMLA be used on an intermittent basis? Yes, they can both be used intermittently. Work with an employee on this to come to an agreement on kind of what that's going to look like. So if an employee needs to take care of a child, maybe 3 days a week under the E FMLA, they can use that for 3 days a week and get paid according to their regular kind of rate of pay for the other 2 days a week. So yes, both of them can be used on an intermittent basis.
Okay. Well, Robert, it looks like we answered 21 questions and have 17 left, but we're right up on the 3 o'clock Central time. And so we're going to end today's webinar. We have on the screen here a little bit more about who Encompass is, what we do, the services that we provide, and it also has our contact information. So if we didn't get to any of your questions, and you'd like to ask some of those questions or understand who Encompass is and what we do and where we can help you, everything that we covered today, that's just a very small percentage of the total pie of where we offer our solutions and expertise. So please reach out to us. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you've found the webinar very useful for you and your company. We will be conducting webinars in the near future. We will be sending those invites. Be on a lookout, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.